Hello, everyone. I'm Tom Munns, for those that don't know me, and I'm with my friend and author of the History of Federal Lands in the United States and the Violence of Faction. Ron, good to have you with me again today.
It's good to be here, Tom, and looking forward to this one. This one's going to cover some ground.
Nice. They usually do, right? Well, if we get
Oh,
longer
yeah.
than sometimes they don't get much farther than a page or two, so it'll be nice to see how far we can get.
Right.
But I am,
If we can clear 3 to 4 pages in one video, that's a deal.
yeah, so I've been getting a couple of questions from some people, so that's been good. They said that they've been watching the videos. One guy called and said he's watching them from the beginning and finds them fascinating. So we'll hope that, and he's a pretty well connected young man. So we'll hope we get some traction with that. But before we get started, as usual, I thought I would give a review for video 13, which was the video that we did previously to this one, just to give you guys an idea of what you missed. And so we were talking about the land inventory of 1953, 1963, 1964, Eisenhower report. We were talking about the Union or Confederacy, the 98th meridian, which is a very interesting topic. I found that was a very interesting demarcation. Um, we talked a little bit about the preamble of the United States Constitution, and I don't think I've ever understood it as well as when Ron talked to me about it. So I think that that would be worthy of listening if you guys are interested in, well, I think I got the preamble worked out. Well, you might not so much after listening to what he says. We talked about selective incorporation, and then we ended up talking a little bit about the Rasmussen decision a few years after the Downs and Bidwell case. So, Ron, thanks for joining me, man. I look forward to getting into this chapter. This is awesome.
Well, I'm glad we're into this chapter two, Tom, because we got one of the things that's pressing in the Idaho political situation right now is water. And Dave Burleson's case is a water case. The Sackett case is a water case. The Lava Ridge Project is going to be utilizing water. It's going to be affecting the water table. There's a lot of, of course, then we also know that there are huge amounts, millions of gallons of water, Idaho water, that's going other places, and they've been shuttling our water to California, and who God knows who else is getting our water. So the state of Idaho is under siege from a multitude of different directions on a variety of its resources that the people around us don't consider those resources to be ours. They consider those resources to be open for whoever needs them the most.
Yeah,
That's the thing that the vassal state arrangement produces. As long as the 11 Western states are in this arrangement, the government and its factions, any of the resources in the Western United States, they will allocate those resources to whoever, quote unquote, they think needs them in the Union. Regardless of what the people of the state have to say about it, makes no difference. If it's on government property, they're going to allocate it as they see fit to solve whatever problem politically or otherwise they may be having. So
it seems like they're
that's
doing
just
that
one
with
of the
everything else. Energy, I mean, I think
it,
that the Lava Ridge, like the wind farms and stuff, they're like, oh yeah, it's not for Idaho. We're gonna go ahead and send that to California.
right. So water, power, minerals. There's a lot of our resources in the state of Idaho that are, how do I say this correctly? I want to make sure it's accurate when I say this. That other people outside of the state of Idaho that are more powerful, more well connected, have dibs on, we can call it that, have dibs on. And so when a problem arises, the state of Idaho is going to be the last. Like if you made a consideration, if the federal government made a consideration of a list of all the people that are going to, from the top of the pecking order to the bottom, Idaho is going to be down at the bottom of the list. Every one of their friends and their buddies in Saudi Arabia and all these other alliances that they've made, they're all going to be in the first 5, 10 categories. And the state is always down at the bottom. Why? Because we're in a vassal state arrangement. We don't control politically what goes on over these areas. And so one of the problems with everything that I just said is that to get a common person in the state of Idaho to understand and even verbalize what I just told you is next to impossible. We've been talking about this for a little while. It's like the political order in the state of Idaho are highly undereducated on a variety of subjects that keeps us in the vassal state arrangement. That undereducation has a cost associated with it.
And
And
you also,
and the
and
cost is this. When you're undereducated, you are the slave of the educated. End of story.
so you had a comment in here, and I think it pertains to kind of what you were talking about. It says the legislation and activities surrounding the water. This is the first paragraph of 51. Is mostly driven by funding of government in all its manifestations, and the policies made for the water are the same sort of policies made for the federal lands and are revenue centric.
That's
So,
right. That
so
is a good way to look at the overall, like if we just say, okay, we're gonna our subject here is going to be surface, or even we could say all resources, right? So this is timber, water, minerals, land available for agriculture, etc. Like any resources, and Idaho is resource rich. Okay, so the issue, again, it's just like Tom said, we'll go through it one more time. The issue is of water in the United States is one of those major but overlooked issues within the political turmoil that characterizes a constitutional democratic republic. That is our system of government. We've gone through this a little bit in previous videos about Republican form of government, and everybody, a lot of people, when I see them or hear them comment on our system of government, it's you got levels of understanding of any topic, and they're very low level, very low resolution in their understanding of our system of government. I'm hoping to change some of that with these videos in the book. Okay, but anyway, in a nation dominated by faction politics, the pressing items get the attention, and they are almost never water until a citizen makes the news because the EPA takes him to court over water. Legislation and activity surrounding water is mostly driven by funding of government and all its manifestations, and the policies made for water are the same sort of policies made for the federal lands and are revenue centric. What do I mean by all of this? That is, Idaho's at the very bottom of the pecking order. The citizens down there with it in the bottom of the pecking order. The factions that dominate politics, they get the lion's share of the proposals, of the a lion's share of the cream of the crop of the government's, what the government considers its resources. Those resources are not considered ours. They are considered the federal government's.
so much for
And
your
the
public
government, the
lands.
federal, right. That's the thing. We have to rearrange the way that we think about and I'm not saying to everybody that you have to adhere to the government's ideology. That's not what's going on here. None of anything I've written in the book is an adherence to the government ideology. None of it. However, if you're going to fight it, you need to understand it. You cannot fight what you don't understand. I am lifting the veil off, pulling the mask off the government, and showing you this is the deal. This is the whole deal. This is how they are operating. Now, if you want to combat it, you want to be an oppositional force, you got to understand it, because once you do, your mind, anybody's mind that's operating at peak performance, will just naturally arrive at, if they have the foundation, they'll naturally arrive at different things that can be done politically and otherwise. It's just a natural consequence of the human brain being fed the foundational information that it needs and then spitting out problem solving ability. Everybody's got this ability. They just don't want to exercise it. That's where we're at in the world. They don't want to exercise it, and they get mad when you put them into a situation where it's like, you either do this or you're going to be out the door looking in.
Mhm.
That's where we're at. So these funding the federal lands have always been a funding mechanism for the United States government. So when it stopped its land disposal program and was no longer disposing of the land and getting revenue that way, it had to look for other ways. Well, it didn't have to. It could have maintained its disposal and funded itself that way. But the problem is once they dispose of the land, there's no residual income. There's only tax income.
Yeah.
And by the 70s, they had realized that the Western lands, if they held on to them, the revenue that they could pull from those things are way beyond. You got residual income, you got resource extraction, you got tax
But it
stuff.
still would be better,
They can
but
pull out tax revenue.
it would still be better that way than it is this way, right? I mean,
Well,
if the
yeah.
federal government
So
could
from
lawfully collect that residual income instead of just hammering the taxpayer, you know, right?
well, yeah. If you want to, and really we should have some kind of conversation about revenue, right? Because that's the main driver of the entire land program and the main reason why they stopped disposal is they wanted to tap the remainder of those lands for all sorts of different. This is a big topic because it's not just the resources. The legal mechanism that they've created for the Western territories is a revenue generator as well. There was a series of articles that were written about this back in the mid 2000s called Sue and Settle.
Mm.
Anybody with a computer that is not busy looking at cat pictures can get on Google and bring up Sue and Settle and read numerous articles that were written by prolific people that were either used to be doing it or were opposing it in the legal sector, and read what the Sue and Settle thing was all about. I wrote it in my book, the whole Sue and Settle thing, because it was a thing, and it's still driving a lot of the revenue generating. All right, I'm going to give you an example, and this is an example that I did not put in the book. When Dave Erlandson was looking for an attorney once he realized he was going to get to the Ninth Circuit, possibly the Supreme Court, we were pounding the pavement looking for attorneys. The Institute for Justice got a hold of him. They had been following his case system, and when we got to the Ninth Circuit, they called him. They said, "Hey, we're following your case. We'd like to take it." He said, "Oh, sounds fantastic." They said, "Well, we want to take it on the Seventh Amendment, and fight it on the Seventh Amendment." Of course, Dave and I know that what I wrote with his help, was far broader than a Seventh Amendment issue. There's a 14th Amendment issue. We coupled it with the Ninth Amendment, and that there were privileges and immunities, which are not a part of any amendment. So what we attempted to do is tie the privileges and immunities power of the state of Idaho to the Ninth Amendment. It's what we did. It's never been done before, right? So this is a case of first impression. We thought, well, I don't get it. I could lose everybody right now in legal theory, so I don't want to do that. So he's having this conversation with Sam Gedge. All right. Now, Sam Gedge is a great guy, and and Mountain States Legal, these are all good organizations, right? But there's a problem. There's a dark horse here. There's a cloud, and it's this. On the Seventh Amendment, if anybody doesn't know what I'll just read you exactly word for word what the Seventh Amendment says so that we're all on the same page. And we'll do a little screen. Well, I'll just read it to you. It's a trial by jury on civil matters. So The Constitution gives you a right to a trial by jury in criminal matters. But in civil matters, if the value in controversy is greater than $20, you have the right of trial by jury, right?
Mhm.
So Sam Gedge is saying this to Dave Burleson. He wants to take it on a Seventh Amendment issue, and we already know what we had done, what we had constructed. And if he would have took that deal, if Dave Burleson would have took that deal, and they only argued it from the Seventh Amendment lens, it would have tremendously narrowed the reach of Dave's case. So Dave, in his brilliance, this is how brilliant this guy is. What kind of command that he's got over the information. He says to Sam, "Well, Sam, I'll tell you what. I'll take into consideration if you can name me one instance that in your lifetime in an administrative proceeding where the value of controversy did not exceed $20." Sam Gedge got off the phone with Dave, said he's going to think it through with his buddies. And a week or so went by. Dave got a call from Sam Gedge. And Sam told him, "We're not going to take the case." Let me explain to you why he was not going to take the case. If you disturb the balance that's been created in the vassal state arrangement by attacking the legal sector's ability to function in these areas the manner in which they are right now, and you reduce the caseload by taking this Seventh Amendment, it's a tremendous reduction in caseload, tremendous, just on a Seventh Amendment issue. You effectively affect the pool available for these legal persons to tap into for their revenue. They would rather make money than be a part of a solution that fixes a vassal state arrangement in the Western United States. Okay?
Mhm.
That's the sue and settle problem. It's much broader than what most people glean from it when they read about it. It's much broader. And its effect is felt over a much wider
Well,
footprint.
to the average citizen, it would be something that we're much more familiar with rather than legal terms is, you know, if somebody's gonna take you to court, you're gonna pay. The question isn't if you're gonna pay or not, which it might should be. It's how much you're gonna pay, right?
Right,
So
right.
we would rather sue and settle and have somebody make the money than have somebody get off um for you know lack of evidence or something else, right?
Well, let me consolidate this a little because I went really broad. Now let's bring it in tight. Let's bring it in real super tight. This big problem that nobody wants to, very few people want to engage in. So they watch these videos or they don't watch these videos and they don't really give two squirts. Like, well, then you're on your own. You get drug into one of these tribunals, Article One situation. You can't figure it out. You don't know where you're at. You're on your own. Don't call me. I'm not going to help you. Um, you got a big Article One and the tribunal system. Okay, so I don't want to get into that because we've gotten to that already a little bit in the previous videos. So here's the way that this works at that level. The the sue and settle that these people are working off of the Article One court system and the tribunal system, right? That's predominantly what it's predicated on. In the vassal state arrangement in the Western United States, that's the dominant legal facility because of so much ownership of federal land.
Mhm.
We haven't gotten to this part in the book, and I was going to tie this together as we went along. But the problem is you won't understand a lot of what I'm saying right now if you don't understand how the Article 1 court systems have their dominance emerges from the government's land. Because the reason why the federal government decided to merge the Article 1, Article 3 courts in the Western United States, in Idaho, right? And so the Ninth Circuit is this merged court system, is because their land ownership. It's because of their land ownership, the dominance of it. 640 million acres.
Well, and if people
That,
don't, and if they don't know what system to operate, when you were talking about being educated and uneducated, I mean, you'd have to be with all of with exposing this, you have to be a lot more educated than people are willing to do. So by blurring the Article 1 and Article 3, judiciary, people are going to become confused, and every time they try to see remedy, they're going to end up losing because nobody knows the difference.
right. Yeah.
That
They're the only people that really understand how the court systems work in the United States are the attorneys, and the attorneys are not going to explain this to you.
Mhm.
They're not. Why?
Yeah.
Because it gives them a financial advantage not to.
Hmm. Perfect. It makes perfect sense.
This is the advantage that the judicial class has over every American. They understand that the Article 1, Article 3 merger, the Article 1 system, really is a holdover artifact from the use of those courts in the territorial system. They just kept them in the Western United States because they were already there. And I think at that time, they were planning on perhaps keeping some of this land. That, well, if we got a bunch of land out there, we want one of our courts there to decide our land matters in our favor.
So then
You see?
we couple that confusion with the I always was really amazed at the bar and the members of the bar in the courtroom. And somehow it just seems like there's everybody's a member of the bar but us. So it seems like it just seems like yeah, the sue and settle thing is enough to be able to keep the animals like us contained, right? To confuse the Article 1 and Article 3, and then to throw everything else in, you've got the bar association that has, everybody's a member. The judge is a member of the bar, the prosecuting attorney is the member of the bar. You can't practice law in any state in our free country with unless you remember the bar. I mean, everything is used to be able to keep us contained so that no matter how we try to fight and get out of the box, they have the control of the lid of the box. So
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah.
carry on.
When you get into the water, the water issues got, you know, it's I want to make sure I'm screen sharing the book so we can talk about water from the book perspective. The water is a big issue because the Western United States are arid. There's water. We've got water. We've got lots of groundwater, but
Mhm.
that's considered a resource that's not ours. Here's the problem with that. Supreme Court of the United States has already opined on this multiple times. The water belongs to the state, not the state as it's talked about in the Bidwell Doctrine,
The
but an
circles.
actual the 10th Amendment body,
So that's the
right?
circles, right?
Yeah, the
Oh,
dots on the map.
so it's still federally owned then, or in control.
What is?
Well, because when you were talking about the states and we were talking about the circles, it would seem to me, if I remember right, that the it still goes back to the sovereignty issue. If Idaho is only 30% sovereign, then how much water do they really own?
Well, this is the issue now. The government early on, you see that when they were passing legislation for water, and I'll give you an example: the Submerged Land Act. It was like 1953 or something. The federal government extinguished title to the submerged lands beneath all waterways to the state of Idaho. Well, to all the states, right?
Mhm.
So all navigable waterways, the land beneath the water, the title to that land was granted, extinguished to the state, and it's called the Submerged Land Act.
Okay, now can you clarify the state again? So they didn't get confused by what I was saying, as
So
it's not the geographical subdivision like we would believe.
whenever I use the term state, I am using it in its 10th Amendment power,
Okay,
in its
so
10th Amendment status,
okay, that which would mean that it
its
only
constitutional status.
or that it only has a very small percentage of sovereignty.
Right.
So
Yeah.
how sovereign does so the question is my question appropriate to say, well, how are they going to exercise state sovereignty when they really don't have any because they don't really know what land is sovereign and what land isn't?
Well, here's my problem with the legislation Congress passes. If Congress, knowing the issue that I know, knowing that the state of Idaho is merely dots in the geographical map,
Mhm.
and it passes a piece of legislation for the state of Idaho, what does it mean? What is it calling the state? Is it calling the state from a political vantage point the entire geographic boundary, or does it mean when it says the state the dots on the map? Because those two are very, 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 very different in outcome.
It's true. Well, and so when you take that, and I don't know if this is deviating from where you're going, but it came into mind, and I'm looking at WOTUS. When I first saw WOTUS, I'm like, what is that? They came up with another acronym. I mean, these people are insane with their acronyms. So now it was like I never read about it before, and maybe it just made the news, and I'm like, Waters of the United States. This is really weird. And so I thought it was really strange. And then, you go into the UN documents, of course, and then they tell you that, collecting water on your own property is illegal because you don't own that water. So they're then they redefine navigable waters to mean that any little sort of drip across your across your
Right.
properties that way. But we have issues with corporations now that are using millions of gallons of water, like Chobani, for example, every single day, or some of these cheese factories and stuff. So I don't know if you feel like talking about that, but is this all part of the same water issue that you're talking about?
Yeah, all this links together lawfully, meaning and historically. So the historical and lawful underpinnings of the water issue are very, very different than what most people have ever heard before.
Mhm.
What they have been hearing their entire lives is the United States government's narrative and all of the factions, and including the conservative faction's narrative.
Mhm.
Here's the problem. I'm going to read this to you out of my book. The legalities surrounding water are important, but in terms of legal precedent and national policy, they just don't agree. We need to know why they don't agree. And to even try to sort this out, we must return to the start of the government's disposal program in the Northwest Ordinance. Why? Why? Why the Northwest Ordinance? Every time Ron goes back to the Northwest Ordinance. It's real simple. There is no other legislation covering the intent of Congress for how new states were going to be admitted into the Union.
Wow.
This is it. This is it. And those weren't states yet. I don't know how many times we have to look at the map that shows just these huge areas that haven't been carved out yet. I mean, what does it take to get it to sink in? Right?
Right.
That land program, that Northwest and Southwest Ordinance, that was the intention of Congress for what to do with the land and for what to do with the water. So let's read about it. When turning to the government's disposal legislation, we find water mentioned. This is a Northwest Ordinance, so it's going to be specific to those water bodies. The navigable waters leading into the Mississippi and St. Lawrence and the carrying places between the same, the tributaries, shall be common highways and forever free. As well to the inhabitants of said territory. Notice it says territory, not state. That means when it was still a territory, they wanted this to apply. When it
It
was
was
still a territory.
it was free when it was territory, but it wasn't when it became a state.
Right. So let's
Right.
look at what happened here. Shall be
Jeez.
common always forever free as well as to the inhabitants of the said territory, as to the citizens of the United States and those of any other states that may be admitted into the Confederacy. Well, what happens if you're not admitted into the Confederacy? What happens
Then
if, say, I don't know, I'm spitballing here, but let's just say you're admitted into the Union,
I was just gonna say that. Careful of the wordplay here.
right?
Yeah.
In law,
Yeah.
the words mean everything.
That's right. That's exactly right.
That's why they have this thing called legalese. It's
Mhm.
it's how they use words to convey ideas, and each word or each phrase or whatever has very specific meaning in law.
I'm proud of myself that I caught that.
Very good. Very good.
Yeah, it
And
says
it goes
without
on to
any
say,
tax imposed.
yeah, without any tax, impost, or duty, therefore. Well, they're not applying that to waters in the U.S. because this is a basics. This would be the basics of the waters of the U.S. rule
Mhm.
if we were adhering to this legislation as the government's enabling legislation for the land program. Because let's just really clarify this really quick. The government passes the Northwest Ordinance. That is the only enabling legislation. That and the Southwest Ordinance, two of them, creates these two ordinances. That is the model for the program. That that model, that program was used throughout the entire United States. But this legislation should have been passed again for the Louisiana territories. So every time we acquired a new chunk of territory, they would have had to pass enabling legislation for it. That would have been Louisiana Purchase. That would have been the Northwest Territories that we got from England. That would have been what we got from Mexico in the treaty with Mexico in Hidalgo.
Mhm.
And every one of these treaties, there should have been enabling legislation right after it.
Mhm.
There was not.
Because they already felt like they had it with the Northwest and Southwest Ordinance.
Right.
Because
So
that's the same crap that they did with the uh with the insular acquisitions,
that's
right?
right.
They figure, well,
That's
that's
right.
the only, so lawful or not, it was what it
Yeah.
was.
So when you
That's
see
good.
what the government's been doing,
Mhm.
is it really? I mean, they were doing this early on. So we acquired Louisiana in 1803. Okay, that that's a long time to be engaged in well, whatever you want to do out of Congress, whatever you want to do.
Hmm.
Why do you think there was a division between the founders that culminated in the Civil War? These people were doing whatever they wanted to do.
Yeah.
Thomas Jefferson is trying to say, look, you cannot do this without legislation. He's trying to figure out how to make it lawful. It's like these guys are leaning on me to do all this shit, and we know that we had to pass legislation for the Northwest and Southwest territories. Are you telling us now that we don't have to do it anymore? We're just going to use the model? And he goes, no, because look, then there's no authorization for anything that you do there. That means you're just doing whatever you want, and you're exercising the same power as other nations on earth are accustomed to exercising. You don't even have to pass legislation. You just do what the frick you want. They've been doing it since 1803, and it's been a steady ramp up from then till now. Okay. So you can clearly see that there was an intention in the land program when it came to water that they wanted these highways to be free and open with no duty, impost, or anything like that. Congress says, oh, no. No, 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 no. No, 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 no. Here's what we're going to do. Okay, we got to get into the history. All right, so
Yeah, stay on task there, Ron.
WOTUS. Let's just tap into the WOTUS rule. Waters of the U.S. The U.S. government's Waters of the U.S. rule has a long history. As early as 1821, a district court in Kentucky asserted admiralty jurisdiction over inland waterways. This caused the government to draft a bill that would confine this jurisdiction's exercise to the oceanic boundary.
Screen froze. Okay.
Huge oceanic.
I didn't miss. We had a whole problem there, Ron. There was a major still there. You were
Yeah,
t
some.
you went to you were talking about the cause the government to draft a bill that would confine jurisdictions. That's the
Whoa,
first line of 53. Go ahead. Continue
the
on, my
heck
friend.
just happened?
Yeah, it was just I had no response.
Whoa.
So,
Wow. Something just. Okay. So, anyway. All right. So, Charles Warren, the Supreme Court of the United States, History 2, 93, 95, Boston, 1922. That's where that comes out of. And I got that out of my constitutional encyclopedia. The idea of the United States government attempting to exercise the exclusive admiralty power inside the United States created a substantial tension in Congress. In Congress, the House was going through an alteration. Andrew Jackson had lost a contingent election, but he was popular enough to draw support for a new alignment. And under the Jacksonian label, they would eventually coalesce into the Democrat Party in 1828. The opposition, formerly known as the anti-Jacksonians, molded themselves into the National Republican Party. Congressional Quarterly's Guide to Elections in 1975. That's where that comes from. The Jacksonian Democrats had formerly been known as the Democrat Republicans, while the newly formed Republicans had been our infamous Federalists. It was the emerging power of the Republicans that would be the driving force behind much of our current situation.
you know, let's make sure that
Okay,
we highlight that just for the people that are politically motivated. The emerging power of the Republicans, not the Democrats,
that's
right?
right.
Okay,
That's right.
just for clarification.
Yeah, they became the Federalists became the powerful party that had risen in Congress, and they changed their name to the Republicans.
Okay, got it.
So, in 1825, we get this case called Thomas Jefferson, and SCOTUS revisited the Admiralty matter and decided to confine the Admiralty to the high tide and inland upon rivers only as far as the ebb and flow of the tide extended. Later on in 1847, in Warren v. Clark, the SCOTUS would revisit the Admiralty issue again, and even though the Democrats held a majority, the SCOTUS overturned the Thomas Jefferson precedent, dismissing the English rule that had previously been abided by the court's judicial decision making. The court adjudicated a collision that occurred on the Mississippi River 95 miles above New Orleans, in which the constitutionality of an act of Congress was at stake. The act, passed in 1845, gave district courts jurisdiction over the Great Lakes and connecting waters, in effect extending that jurisdiction into all waterways inside the United States. In a downstream decision regarding the Genesee Chief, the Thomas Jefferson standard gave way to the exclusive jurisdiction that Admiralty jurisdiction carries with it. And it was asserted into all the waters of the U.S., thus setting the stage for the WOTUS rule emergence. As we can see, this is in conflict with the disposal legislation's intent for newly created states, and of course, it would be a gross misrepresentation of constitutional law to assume Congress would change the disposal legislation absent an amendment. And get into the constitutionally made portion of Article 4 of the Northwest Ordinance, meaning that if Congress is going to deviate from the intention of the land program, they could do it, but they had to do it in a constitutional manner. Or as Article 4 of the legislation, the land legislation, states, it had to be constitutionally made, not legislatively made, constitutionally made. That's why Thomas Jefferson stated, I think we need an amendment. He was right. Either we needed a constitutional amendment to make a change, because he was part of the whole program. He knew either we need a amendment, constitutional amendment to make a change, or we need some sort of enabling legislation to move the program into the new areas that we just acquired. But his voice is drowned out. By then, this powerful party realized, oh crap, land. We're amassing large chunks of land, and we're going to do that for us and our posterity. Screw the people in the Western United States.
So,
Screw them.
Ron, let me jump in for a sec. Admiralty law, Admiralty jurisdiction has a special, I have a special understanding of that because of the things that we had studied previously. When we were first learning about Admiralty jurisdiction, is anything that what we had learned years ago the same as what you're seeing now?
Very little.
Okay.
Um,
So, because
what we
what I understand about that is, and I'm hoping that, rather, I should guess, you should just explain it to the folks so that they understand, because we're going to inevitably have people on here that are, the USA Corp and that kind of an element here. So I
Yeah,
think it's great for you to clarify this particular element, since they'll grab onto the word and go, see, Admiralty jurisdiction,
yeah,
we were right,
yeah,
Then we're
yeah.
throwing the Act of 1871 and then the whole thing. So go ahead and explain that for us, would you?
Well, the thing that people don't understand is Admiralty is a constitutional jurisdiction. Now, does that mean that whenever Admiralty jurisdiction is asserted, the Constitution goes with it? Does it follow the flag? Not necessarily. The thing about Admiralty jurisdiction is it just gives the government the authority to act. Now, how they act is another matter entirely. So it
But they
depends
would
on the situation.
but they would only be able to act in certain arenas, right? Like you can't have you can't have admiralty jurisdiction on the land, right?
Well, so this the way this works is this. It's not okay. So maybe people don't know, but an admiralty action at law is called in rem.
Oh, good word.
NREM, in rem, and it just means that it's a case that's happening directly under the admiralty jurisdiction of the court, triggering an admiralty outcome. Meaning typically it's a two ships bang into each other or something like that.
So it's not about that our rights are actually being diminished, although under exclusive jurisdiction you could argue they are, but it's more because of exclusive jurisdiction than it is because of admiralty jurisdiction, right?
You got it.
Okay,
You
good.
got it. The admiralty jurisdiction just gives them the authority. It's the
Okay.
exclusive power that we're worried about.
Okay, good. Got it.
That's exactly right. Very well
Nice.
done.
Thanks.
So you can see that we just haven't understood things very well. Yes, admiralty jurisdiction exists. Yes, it's a thing. It might be why you got the gold fringe flag in the courtroom. Yes, but what does it mean?
Right.
All it means is that the federal courts are asserting authority, or the federal government is asserting authority through its federal courts, and it gives it the ability to take admiralty cases, which are cases in rem,
Mhm.
and it gives it authority to take on other matters as well. It doesn't mean they're applying the Uniform Commercial Code to everybody. That's not what it means.
Okay.
The Uniform Commercial Code is not anything that's ever been used in law. Only people using the UCC in law are the sovereign citizen movement people. They're the only ones using it. The government has never used Uniform Commercial Code in the domestic United States, and just because they're asserting a Admiralty jurisdiction. That just means that they're granted a federal authority by virtue of that jurisdiction. That's all it means.
Mhm. Okay.
Okay. And it's a constitutional jurisdiction. Now, they would not be able to apply that jurisdiction if the state had full ownership over the water.
Mhm.
Okay, so the water is the most convoluted of all the subjects. And it took us a while to figure it out. Years.
So
Basically,
is is part of the reason why water is an issue is if I understand interstate commerce, things that actually move from state to state would require some sort of exclusive jurisdiction, would it not? Because
okay, so
if water leaves if water leaves Oregon, for example, goes through Idaho and then it ends up in California, does California have any say so in the water that leaves Idaho? Or Idaho in what leaves Washington? I mean, that's been an ongoing question I've had for a long time. And that's why I believe there has to be, at least in my mind, would have to be some sort of federal oversight over that issue.
all right, we're going to get into a case here.
And sorry if
It's
I'm
called
deviating. I don't mean
No,
to.
you are not. You're right on track. I just
Okay.
taken the moment while you're speaking to bring up this case because you segued into it beautifully.
Okay. Thank you.
This is called Gibbons versus Ogden. What is this case? It's a water case. It's the exercise of the commercial power of the government on water. The power of regulating commerce extends to the regulation of navigation. That was the whole idea of the outcome of Gibbons versus Ogden.
But the problem is when they decided they want to manipulate this and redefine this to mean any water that drops off of your roof, right? I mean, we all know what navigable water is,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So that's when this thing went. So that you could say that the outcome of Gibbons and Ogden is lawful or whatever, but it would be the redefinition. It would be the devil being in the details, right?
Well, so we read Gibbons versus Ogden. Dave and I read it, and the outcome of Gibbons versus Ogden creates a different scenario than what the government has been exercising for since 1824. Um, in Gibbons versus Ogden, you're going to find the legal rationale presented by the judge in his written opinion is that he's stating that while he agrees that the power to regulate commerce so far as it extends is exclusively vested in Congress and no part of it can be exercised by a state.
Mm,
Understand that word exclusive being used here.
for sure.
Um, they started using this term more and more and more. It was used early on, and they thought, well, every time Congress engages in the exercise of one of its powers,
It is
if
exclusive.
it, they're calling it they're the people that are doing this, writing all this and running the system. They count it as an exclusive use of the power. So anytime Congress is engaged in commerce, they say we're doing it exclusively.
Mhm,
There's a problem with the use of this word
mhm.
that nobody that I know of has taken him to task on. Because if the Bill of Rights act as a restriction against government action, then nothing the government does can be construed as exclusive. It must always pass through the filter of the Bill of Rights.
Mhm.
And if it doesn't trigger the Bill of Rights, then you can exercise it exclusively, meaning that it's already passed through the filter and it's not infringing on any rights. So therefore, as long as you exercise it in that fashion, nobody can stop you from doing
Hmm.
it. Okay.
Yep.
The other
And I,
problem in Gibbons versus Ogden is this: the legal rationale presented by the judge did not was not predicated on commercial activity to an area. It was commercial activity to an activity.
oh, wow.
It was tied to the activity and not the area. Everybody that's working in government now and working in the legal sector now states that Gibbons versus Ogden applies to the area.
Oh,
When we read Gibbons versus Ogden, we go, no, it applies to the activity. That's a huge freaking difference.
for
The
sure is.
waters of the U.S. rule is predicated on Gibbons versus Ogden applying to the area. It's what it's predicated on.
Hmm.
If you pull the rug out from underneath that by saying no, it only applies to the activity, you can't apply the waters of the U.S. rule. You see, the
Do you have an
government's got a
example?
problem.
Do you have an example just for the folks?
I just gave an example.
Okay, good. Just want to make sure. Okay.
I can do another one.
No, it's fine.
Okay.
I just missed it.
Um, well, that's why I brought this case up, just to go through there and go. Let me let me let me use a case to highlight the waters of the U.S. rule and the problems with it.
Hmm.
And this is the best way to highlight the problems with it is compare it back to Gibbons versus Ogden, read the case,
Hmm.
determine for yourself if what the judge is saying applies to the activity or the area, and you'll see that he was talking about the activity, not the area.
Okay.
If he's applied it to the area, now you've got a conflict between the state's power over its own waters, which you would derive out from a series of acts like the Multiple Use Act, for example, in which the federal government acknowledged the state's um, authority over the waters within its geographic boundaries.
Okay.
And so, and the Organic Administration Act, or in the national forests, the federal government only maintained or retained for itself the power over making sure that water flows were maintained.
Okay. We frozen again? I think we froze again, brother. Well, everybody, it looks like we've had some technical difficulties today. We lost Ron, and we're just up about time, 3:36, unless he jumps back on for 10 more minutes, we're probably going to close the video down. We've been covering chapter 6 with water, the waters of the United States, and some of the cases throughout history and the way that the federal government saw the issue, as well as the states. We have been covering, like I said, chapter 6, page 51 through 53. And if we don't get back to it, we will be covering Admiralty jurisdiction on page 54. And let's see, 54, 55, 56, before we embark on chapter 7 on page 57, that's called the William McKinley Theodore Roosevelt era. So I just wanted to say that I really appreciate you guys visiting with us today. I'm hoping that you gained something out of the video. If you have any questions about the topic, please put those in the comment section in the video, or go to Ron's website at thehistoryofFederalLandsInTheUnitedStates.com and feel free to contact him there. If you're interested in interviewing him, you can reach out to him with the same link. And I'm hoping that you guys benefited from this video. This is video number 14. And so please follow up with us on the continuing series. And we look forward to seeing you guys then. So I appreciate you guys attending. I hope you got a lot from the video. I do apologize for the technical difficulties, but stay tuned with us in future videos. Thanks a lot.